Raphael on the mic.
And hey, y'all, this is Eric, and I am so freaking excited about today's guest. Do you want to tell them why, Rafaela?
Absolutely. So let me go ahead and let them know, because today we will be discussing couples and mismatched libidos, sexual desire, and when the sex just isn't sexing anymore.
Ooh.
So we brought on an extra special guest.
Can I just say, honestly, I am just so stunned that we get to spend the next 45 minutes talking with this dynamic force. I've been giddy all morning, truly.
Y'all are so nice.
No, you're truly, I am really excited about this.
Well, then let me go ahead and introduce this special person. So listeners, we are so excited to have sexuality educator and researcher, two-time New York Times best-selling author of Come As You Are and co-author of Burnout, and author of the newly released Come Together, Dr. Emily Nagoski. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
So as we stated, we are going to be talking about sexuality in relationships, but also just libido in general. So as everyone knows, I am a sexuality and trauma therapist, and this comes up a lot. Why aren't we having sex anymore? Why aren't we having better sex? Whatever that means, we have to figure it out, right? And then what do? Right? We've been trying and trying and trying. But what I've also found is that oftentimes people aren't really trying and trying.
Okay.
They're doing a lot of trying in their head where they're going through the narratives, they're having all of the complaints, right? But it's not really being vocalized in big ways to their partner. And then it takes them years to get to me, by which point there's frustration, resentment, all types of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, I am for that. First off, again, years of going through. Okay.
Years.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, the Gottman researchers say on average it takes 6 years of a problem being present in a relationship before that couple seeks support.
Okay.
Right?
Well,
So for all the folks out there listening,
don't wait 6 years.
don't wait 6 years.
No.
You know,
Though,
come in sooner.
so I trained as a sex therapist, though I did not become a sex therapist.
Right.
And the first ever couple that I worked with in my first ever clinical internship was a couple that had been together for like 40 years. They had not had sex of anything that they identified as sex for over 10 years.
Wow.
So my clinical partner and I started them on sensate focus right from the very beginning. We established the rules of like, so you're not going to be having sex while you're going through this process. They're like, no problem, because we haven't had sex for 10 years. Came back the next week, they had had sex twice because we had like told them they weren't allowed to.
Yes.
Right. Oh, we love
We
love
love a
just
little
defying.
rebellion.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the intervention,
Little
sexual
brats.
rebellion
Yeah.
activity.
Yeah.
Play work.
Yeah.
Now they're just a couple brats.
So, could I ask you, what's your thoughts about sensate focus approach for working with folks with mismatched libido, or maybe just going through a dry spell in their sex life?
Yeah. So I have a wide variety of thoughts. The standard model, of course, is profoundly heterocentric and also intercourse centric. Like the whole thing leads up to intercourse as though that's some sort of like standard or goal to work toward. So, but an adapted version of sensate focus where the stages are defined by the clients instead of prescribed, I think, and certainly clinical experience would say that the process of breaking down initiation to taking turns and certainly one person touching at a time and the practice of self-protection and self-assertion, those are really important, very basic skills that when people have the opportunity to work on them can really improve a couple's sexual connection over the long term. When I was doing my original clinical training, the people who were training me were a married couple, and they went through a little like bubble of sensate focus every year. just as like a refresher to like check up on their initiation styles and their ability to communicate what they do or don't enjoy, and to spend time touching each other in a way that was not sexual, that didn't involve the body parts that are covered by underwear. So it can be great, and it really does need to be updated and adapted from the original model.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really good points. I
Yeah.
think also because it can be such a huge opportunity for practicing mindfulness, right? So instead of touching, in Sensate, it's like, okay, you're exploring the body, you're trying to, give touch, receive touch, and all this other stuff. You're trying to figure out what do you like and what you don't like. But also, if you can practice mindfulness while you're engaging in the touch, I think that can really elevate it and decenter the end goal of intercourse or penetration.
And I think it models prioritizing pleasure and experiencing sensations rather than worrying about desire. I'm sure you know this, but for people listening, the history of the field is that sex therapy really kind of started with sensate focus. And that changed radically when Helen Singer Kaplan looked at her practices, essentially their clinical successes and their clinical failures. And they saw that the couples where they were just not having a positive impact was the couples where the problem was desire. And desire is nowhere in Masters and Johnson's model of sexual response. And so she developed the triphasic model that begins with desire. And it was world changing and absolutely necessary and a feminist in development in our approach to understanding sexuality, that like wanting sex is an important component of it. And it also turns out 20-ish years later, Rosemary Basson's model of responsive desire, where the desire doesn't come first, the desire emerges in response to a sexy context, to pleasure already happening. It turns out that's normal too. And that actually is a pretty good fit for a sensate focus approach, where you're having this contact with your partner because like it's your homework assignment and you said you would, and it's not because you're horny.
Right.
So eliminating the like necessity of being in, like having more than one person in the mood for the same thing simultaneously, like get that to happen every night at dinner.
Yes. Let's commit to it.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Let's say we're doing things different. I like to use that
Yes.
phrase, like we're doing things differently because the way we were doing shit before is not working
No.
anymore.
Yeah.
Right? So let's commit to just doing things differently.
And man, when you do things differently, a lot of gunk bubbles up
Oh,
from the
gosh.
bottom, right?
Yes. Yes, some things that
Like
you weren't
what?
expecting.
Like what type of things?
Man, when a couple is starting sensate focus and they start getting touched, like all their whole history of being touched in those places by this person, but also by anybody else who has touched them there, whether they liked or wanted it or not, all of that just emerges, and they're being encouraged to communicate whether they like something or don't like something. And maybe this is the first time they've been explicitly empowered to say, nope, I don't like that. And because the memories of past touch lives, is activated by the touch in our skin, it can come alive in really emotional ways. That makes me really glad that those folks are in therapy at the same time that they're engaging in this practice, so they can go to their therapist and be like, so this is what happened, is a whole bunch of past stuff came up and we had to stop doing our sensate focus homework and just like process all those old feelings that didn't even have anything to do necessarily with the person who's in the sensate focus session with me, but are just like all this crap I have living in my body.
Yes. Oh, that's such a big one. And it's just really also naming trauma,
Right.
right? And how much space it can take up in our lives and our sex lives and our relationships. And so I'm thinking about the willingness model. So we're kind of talking about that in commitment. So it's basically saying to your clients or having someone reflect, are you open to the idea? Are you at least willing to consider that you might be open to sex or you might want to get there, right?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you have to be really mindful of how you approach this conversation, because it can feel like, are you telling me to have sex I don't want to have? Are you telling me to ignore my body, which is not what we're saying. But I want to dive into that a little bit with you, Dr. Nagoski. Like, when you think about the willingness model, you're talking about, hey, let's just come to the bed, like meet me here, let's see what happens. How do you also navigate your trauma history and consent and autonomy when you really aren't feeling it, but you want it?
Yeah. Yeah, you want to want it. It's such a complex feeling because if you want it and you don't want it and you notice yourself not wanting it, what do people start doing in their minds? They start to like criticize and
Yeah.
judge themselves and beat
Just running
themselves up.
circles.
And is that making it easier to want sex? It just makes it more difficult, which is why I am very much in favor of just walking away from the idea of desire for sex and really centering pleasure. This is not a simple change to make because so many of us were raised with ideas about pleasure that we're not allowed to experience it, that we have to earn it, that our bodies don't deserve it until we conform with such and such ideal or until we engage in such and such behavior. So pleasure is not a simple thing to talk about.
Yeah.
But here's my wild idea.
Okay.
Let's imagine a world where all of us only ever do sexual things that we like.
Okay.
My eyes are closed.
So
I'm
you like
picturing it.
you show up, you put your body in the bed with your partner, you let your skin touch your partner's skin, and maybe your body goes, "Oh, I really like this person and I really like this sensation. This is a great idea." Or maybe you have an experience like I had while I was writing and then promoting Come As You Are, where I was like so stressed out. I would put my body in the bed. I would let my skin touch my partner's skin. And I would literally burst into tears out of stress and then fall asleep.
Yeah.
Right? Like I was willing. I showed up for the moment, and what my body wanted and needed in that moment was not erotic connection. It was grieving and rest. And I am gifted with a really close connection with my body signals. Like I cannot help noticing what my body is experiencing and following it. But I can imagine a lot of people getting to that place. You agreed to show up, you put your body in the bed, your skin touches your partner's skin. And regardless of sort of what happens from the neck down, your brain is like, but I'm supposed to do sex things. And so I'm going to ignore all of the like stress activation or the like dorsal shutdown, disconnection, disassociation. I'm just going to go ahead and do the thing that I have been taught to do, regardless of how I feel about it.
Yeah.
Which is, it can have a potential long-term consequence. The more you go ahead and have sex that you do not like, the more you reinforce that connection that sex equals your pleasure doesn't matter. Sex equals just an obligation that you are pursuing for somebody else's benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm literally, that's what I was thinking is like, sex is an obligation, right? Like it becomes this thing that you feel you just have to do. It almost becomes like a chore, like, okay, one more thing checked off, but like
Checked off the list.
you're not actually enjoying
Yeah.
it. And so like for me, I'm thinking like, how do we, help people understand or begin to maybe unlearn that the obligation doesn't have to be there? Like what does that look like?
The difficulty is that there's a very low availability of metaphors here, because if it's your yoga practice, if it's your physical activity practice, if it's eating freaking vegetables or whatever, you're like, I need to care for my body, there's a thing you do to care for your body every day. You don't have to really like enjoy your yoga practice. You can go and practice your yoga and have it be like, there's like gunk in my body and this is uncomfortable, and it's good for me to like be here present with the gunk in my body and like turn with kindness and compassion and loving kindness toward this gunk in my body, and you'll be better off at the end of that practice. And like, let's face it, like green vegetables, they're good for you, whether you love them or not. And you try to find ways to make them as delicious as possible. But like, maybe you don't love green vegetables. With sex, it's not like that. It's not like just show up and do it. And even if you don't enjoy the experience, like, it was good for you. Maybe for some people that's true. But most of the time, and certainly the only advice I give is, if you don't like it, not only don't do it, also don't feel bad about not doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is the hard part, because I'm going to talk about some gendery shit right now.
Yes,
Please,
please do.
yes.
Necessary.
We live is here in America. We live in a cultural binary, despite, you know, many decades of effort to the contrary. And I believe we're making progress. Nevertheless, here we are in a gender binary where on the day a person is born, somebody looks at your genitals and goes, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl," with the exception of intersex kids, which is a whole other
Yeah.
Trauma.
thing.
Yeah.
A whole other source of trauma. And they raise you according to sort of like rules and regulations about what emotions you're allowed to have and how you're allowed to express them, who you're supposed to be as a sexual person, what kind of people you're supposed to fall in love with, what love is supposed to mean and how important it's supposed to be for you. So how important sex is supposed to be for you based on nothing more important than just the organization of your genital structure, right? So by the time we get to adulthood, we have been taught to believe that part of our worth as human beings can be assessed based on whether or not we are successful at sex, based on the rules we were assigned at birth.
Right.
And so if you're a person who got the "it's a boy" rules and regulations on the day you're born, by the time you get to adulthood, if you identify as a man, part of what people have been telling you for decades is that your value as a human on earth can be partly assessed by your success at like putting your penis in someone else's body.
Yes.
And when someone says, "No thanks, no penis for me tonight," maybe all they're saying is like, "I've had a really long, difficult day. I just don't have the energy for it." But it can feel like what they're saying is, "You know what? No, you're not quite worth the air you breathe as a man," which is not what they're saying, but it feels that way because you've been taught that that's what it means.
Exactly.
So, or if you've been given the "it's a girl" package, you've been trained to believe that your whole moral purpose on earth is to be pretty, happy, calm, generous, and above all, unfailingly attentive to the needs of others. And so if your partner initiates sex, your moral obligation is to make sure their needs are met. And so regardless of how you feel this obligation to go ahead and have the sex because your success is not defined by your pleasure, but by your ability to meet someone else's needs, regardless of the cost to you and your body.
Absolutely.
That's a real one right there.
So that obligation, like, I wish that could just be like, here are the 3 steps to overcoming the belief that you have an obligation to have sex. But the fact is, like, its roots are deep in our sexualities, and really overcoming it requires dismantling the gender binary nonsense that were planted in our brains literally the day we were born, if not sooner.
Yeah. And also remembering that we all learn each other's gender shit, right? So if you're socialized as, you know,
Absolutely.
a woman, you're also learning what it means to be a man. So you are taught like, oh, their worth is tied to this. So if you say no, then, oh, I don't want them to feel bad. I don't want them to feel like less of a man. And then on the other side, if you are taught what a woman is supposed to be and you're a man, it's like, well, no, you're supposed to meet my needs. You're supposed to tell me yes. You're supposed to, you know, so it's like we're not learning these things in a bubble. We're learning this about ourselves and one another, and it's influencing the way that we interact with one another.
Like, we didn't get to choose that.
Right.
Nobody waited until we were old enough to give consent to say, like, would it be okay with you if I planted these ideas about how your body is fundamentally unworthy of love and pleasure? Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Like, we didn't get a chance to say no to that. So it's not fair that it's like planted in our brains, but it is a learning opportunity.
It is.
Yay, we get to go into our brains and all the things we've learned about sex and make choices about what of those old things we want to keep and what we want to pull out and discard to create space for the things that we have chosen for ourselves.
Yeah. That's the beautiful thing, though. It's like we do have choice. A lot of times it feels like we don't. And for, you know, and to be honest, sometimes we don't. Just depending on our circumstances, situation, our culture, whatever. It may take a while for us to actually get away from those things that are oppressive and to step into our empowerment.
Right.
And then from there, being able to say, oh, I'm pulling, these are weeds, pulling this out, and I'm going to replace it with something that is not only beautiful but helpful. Like it, helps me breathe.
And
It
hopefully
helps me stay
helping other
grounded.
people.
It helps me what?
And hopefully help other people do the
Oh
same.
yeah, hopefully modeling. That's so
Yeah.
important, right?
Yes.
So like as we're talking, this idea just this like example just keeps popping up to my head about like sides and like queer male identified people. I'm really trying to figure out a better way to term that phrase, men who have sex with men. I'm like, it feels very limiting to me, but
Same gender loving men.
I like, how do we like even pull out the
men part? Yeah.
Like I'm just trying to figure it out because there are people who yeah.
Yes.
Anyways, but this idea of like being side is like you're not interested in penetrative sex. You're not top. You're not bottom. You're on the side. You want all the other things except for penetration, which I think also speaks to the scripts that we've been told around, even for like queer men who have sex with men. Like the whole point is who's the top, who's the bottom, who's putting their penis in someone's butt, right? And like the side idea is like, no, I'm actually rejecting these scripts and doing something that is actually fulfilling than just this idea that I have to be this or that.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, how do we?
Yeah, but it's hard because so much of sex, is about body parts. It's about genitals, and it doesn't have to be, but that's what we make it as society. So it's like, regardless of who you date and the type of body they have, there's this idea that sex is intercourse. It is penetration.
Right.
And it takes a lot of intentional work to get out of that framework, to redefine sex,
Right. So speaking of that,
I have found...
Oh, go ahead. I was going to ask you your example because I really actually love your example of what sex is or could be, but I'll let you.
Oh yeah.
Let you share.
So I made up a definition of normal and perfect sex because people want, but tell me the definition. Like, how do I know I'm doing it right, in heavy quotes. But I would point out that there's a whole bunch of recapitulation of the gender binary in queer communities where there are ideas about like who's the top and who's the bottom. One of the people that I interviewed for the book came out as a lesbian in her 20s. So she had a bunch of experience living in a heterosexual world and was really astonished when she started participating in the lesbian community that was available to her geographically, how much it was more reinforcement of a binary of the tops and the bottoms of like, you take off all your clothes, I'm not taking off my clothes. You don't touch me, I touch you. These rigid roles. And it's okay to be like a butch in the streets and a femme in the sheets, but you will only ever be a femme in the sheets if you're a femme in the sheets. And she resisted being pushed into another binary box of who she was allowed to be. And it worked out for her. She met a partner with whom she has raised children and everything, and they have more equitable and flexible sexual connection. But it took them eradicating this fucking gender binary from their two cisgender women relationship. So the binary is not just a problem for the straights.
Right.
It's like everybody's got this in their brains. So, which is why it's so important. It is harder for heterosexuals. I have a whole like extra separate chapter for heterosexual type relationships because they look so close to what the ideal is that you sort of have this fantasy that like actually you could, if you tried hard enough, be perfect and match like what the script is.
Yeah. Like you're so close. You're right there.
You're so close. So maybe it's true. Maybe it's true.
Yeah.
Because I could, because the body parts are there, right? The haircuts are there. Surely.
The clothes. Like we have the costume. What do you mean?
Yeah.
That's right. I am wearing the costume.
I love that. Yeah.
Judith Butler would be proud.
Yes.
Yes. Oh man.
But so my definition of normal sex then is any sexual contact among peers where everyone who's there is glad to be there. So that doesn't have to be like hot and horny, can't wait to put my tongue in your mouth, but like just like, hey, hello, hey, howdy, glad to be here. And can stop at any time with no unwanted consequences, including no unwanted emotional consequences like that. Oh, come on, but come on, you said you would, or you loved me, or any of those sort of things that are kind of manipulative. So glad to be there, free to leave with no unwanted consequences and no unwanted pain. And then perfect So notice that has no reference to like what genitals are involved or what behaviors count as sexual behaviors. There might be genital contact involved, or it might just be one person licking between the other person's toes.
Yeah.
Like whatever counts as
Whatever.
sexual behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all normal as long as everybody's glad to be there and free to leave
Mm-hmm.
with no unwanted pain. And perfect sex
Okay.
is normal sex where also everyone involved turns toward whatever's happening in this moment with kindness and compassion and confidence and joy. So that means if somebody has a penis and would like that penis to be erect and an erection is not happening, everybody involved turns toward that non-erect penis with kindness and compassion and confidence and joy without being like, no, but like we have to fix it. There's a problem. There's something wrong because the penis is not erect. Do you know how many amazing things there are you can do with a non-erect penis that you cannot do with an erect penis?
Yes.
So many things.
So many
And
things.
also you can just go ahead and do a whole bunch of things that are totally unrelated to the penis.
Right.
Like
People get
there's
stuck,
so many
though.
options in the moment.
They get so stuck in their head. You know, we have this conversation of decentering, you know, the penis and penetration, and people are like, oh, that sounds great. But what? In the moment, it's like a catastrophe.
Right.
It is. And so really giving folks permission.
Because there's so much meaning
There's so
that
much
we have
meaning.
assigned
Yeah.
to that like blood flow.
Yes.
It's literally, it's blood flow.
Oh my gosh. I listen, go ahead.
And there's so much shame, just like with the penis in general, that vulva owners do not experience when it comes to vaginal dryness. You know, right? There's some, but a lot of times it's internal. Usually the partner's like,
it's
"Here,
different.
get some lube." Yeah, it's different. But when it's the penis is not doing what we think the penis should be doing, it's just like, what does it mean? What is wrong with me?
Yeah.
I can't perform, and that performance anxiety comes up over and over again.
It means something about that person as their like whole identity of whether or not they're man enough. It shows up as like a meaning about the relationship, like there's something wrong with the relationship if an erection isn't happening, or it means the person is not attracted enough to the other person. Let me add, this was a long time ago. I gave like a talk in someone else's class when I was in grad school, and an undergrad sort of followed me out and walked with me back to my office so that he could talk to me about his situation. He was in a sexual relationship with somebody. He described, he's like, I wasn't really into it. I didn't really want to be in a relationship, but she really wanted me to. So I just went ahead and had sex with her. And I really struggled to get an erection. And while I absolutely believe that an erection doesn't have to mean anything in particular about your relationship, he thought there was something wrong with his body because he wasn't able to get an erection to have sex with someone he wasn't into, that he did not like.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they think it should just push a button
And it's go.
and go up.
The blow.
Every erection, you should be always ready to have any sex that's available, regardless of how you feel about the other person. And erections should be easy and so big and so hard.
And so hard.
so hard.
There's no blood in the body except for in the genitals.
Right. Yeah. The narrative is like there's no blood in your brain. You have just become this penis.
Yes. Ugh,
Very objectifying, to be honest.
is,
We don't talk about it enough.
that's very true.
Yeah.
I had lunch a few years ago with a group of sex therapists who told me that one of the fastest growing aspects of their practices was talking to cisgender men who just needed a space to come and talk about all the grief they had about their genitals, about like the shape and size of their penis, the like desperation they felt about their genitals being inadequate. And a lot of it was born of watching porn, where the variety of penises does not match the variety of penises in the real world, just like the variety of bodies that you see, especially in mainstream porn, does not match the variety of bodies in the real world.
Just media in general.
Yeah.
Right? Like we forget that porn is media. It is fake. It's entertainment.
That part.
So it's like you're comparing yourself towards or to actors, you know? So it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Music videos, you know, superstars, all this other stuff. We find ourselves comparing our bodies to these people when, you know,
This is their job.
this is their job.
Yeah.
They are professional
They're
athletes.
professional
Yes,
athletes. Like,
truly.
right. Yeah. So,
Okay. We've been talking for a while. I love it. Let's take a break. So I want to like I'm loving this. Again, this is like I said, I've been giddy all morning because it's just so fun to talk to you, and so I want to like maybe delve in a bit deeper into like okay, so we know that all these scripts are happening to people, all these feelings, all this difficulty, like all these things are just kind of swirling around us. It's everything everywhere all at once. Like I keep using that reference, but it's so true because it is just always happening to us. And so like how can we start to like put into practice some things to help, you know, when we are in a relationship and we're trying to figure out that mismatch of libidos, like what do we start to do to address it?
I have found that one of the most efficient ways to cut through the frustration and the confusion that builds up between people is to stop asking, why don't you want sex? And start asking, what is it that you want when you want sex? And just as important, what is it that you don't want when you don't want sex? Because, spoiler, it's probably not orgasm. You can do that on your own. Probably. Yes. And if you can't, there's whole books about that. But it is probably going to be something like connection. It's going to be shared pleasure. It's going to be being and feeling wanted, especially these parts of ourselves that we have been taught for so many years are not just unlovable, but are shameful or dirty or like just like aversive. Having those parts of ourselves be embraced and welcomed. One of the things we want when we want sex is that feeling of being wanted and wantable. And also the feeling, I use the word freedom to describe it, where you are released from all of your worries about your day-to-day life and can just allow your attention to dwell in the pleasurable things that are happening here in the moment. You might want to have a sense that your identity is being affirmed. You might want to have a sense that your relationship is connecting. Especially if there was like some sense of disconnection in your relationship, sex is one of the ways that we come back into connection with each other. Though it can also be really difficult for people to have sex when they feel disconnected. It's complicated. People vary. But when you replace the conversation from why don't you want sex? What's wrong? And it's always the person who doesn't want sex who's the broken one, right? It's never the one who wants sex more being like, why do I want all this sex? What's wrong with me? It's the lower desire person being like, what's especially if there was a change, because there was a change, we assume that change means something broke.
Right.
And that's just not true. I always recommend people frame any sexual relationship as being a third thing that exists between you. Like it's not person A's fault and it's not person B's fault. No one is broken. Your relationship isn't broken. It's just your context changed. And so your sexual connection adapted in response to those changes. And it is normal and healthy for your bodies to adapt to change. That's one of the remarkable things about human bodies is how adaptable they are. So you think about, what is it in our context that changed? Did somebody's stress level change? Did somebody's health status change? Did somebody have a traumatic incident in like the long ago past that is just now bubbling up? What happened in the context that changed? And is it an aspect of the context that we have any degree of control over? If it is, let's start thinking about how we can change the context together in order to create a context that makes it easy for our brains to have access to pleasure. And to get those things that we identified as being the things that we wanted. Right. And in the meantime, are there any other things we do together that get us connection, shared pleasure, feeling wanted and wantable, and that freedom to turn off all our stress and just focus on the pleasure of the moment?
Yeah. I love that. And I think it, like that last piece speaks to even your definition of sex is like, what if we just really love to go apple picking? I don't know why that thought came, but like, you know, if we could go apple picking and have, you know, all these feelings of joy and want to be there and feel like we can leave, but like we don't want to, right? Yeah. And so how can we think about all these other aspects of our lives that can feed into this other part, which is like the sex part?
Yeah. So to be totally honest, I have been struggling with long COVID for about a year and a half. I've been physically disabled, like couldn't walk to the end of my driveway to get the mail without debilitating pain and exhaustion. And so that was part of why my own relationship was suffering around sexuality. But this fall, we had our winter supply of firewood delivered. We got 2 cords of wood, which is a huge amount of wood. Ladies, sorry. And it was a triumph that I was able to, I had the energy and the physical wherewithal to go out and help my partner stack the wood, which is not a euphemism. For us to be able to like go out together and move our bodies cooperatively to accomplish a shared goal was a measure of my progress in my illness and an opportunity for us to feel that like connection, that partnership, that cooperation, that joy that we have in each other. That was part of the foundation that ultimately like allowed our sexual connection to revive itself as my health returned.
And you know what though? We still have, I'm going to throw the wrench back in there because what can still happen if you're not focusing on like what's the sex you want to have, how do you want to feel during sex, like what's the reason for sex. You can do all of the good shit during the day and connect and have fun and then still feel dread because now you're like, I'm going to get pestered for sex, right? Because sometimes it's like, oh, we're working on this thing. My partner's like, oh, you said if you're in a good mood, if I decrease your stress, if I do the dishes, if I do this, you're going to want sex.
So we're
now,
ready to go.
You're doing all this stuff in the house and taking care of the kids. And so in my head, I'm like, you're going to want sex today because you did all the things I said I need done for me to get in a sex mind space. But the thing that's still not being addressed is I'm not happy with the sex that we're having. So I'm still not looking forward to it, right? You're giving me green bean casserole and I don't like your recipe. Right? And I've also told you how I want my green bean casserole. Or maybe I want something else.
Right.
But you're not doing it. And I see this very often where folks are like, I care about your pleasure. But when the partner tells them exactly what they want, they forget about it. There's stuff happening, but it's not happening for the client. And so they're not desiring the sex because they don't want that sex. And they're just like, I feel bad because the therapist told me to spend more quality time and to have fun and put sex to the side and then it will come back. And now I'm just like, but it's still the sex I don't want.
Right.
And people, man, the struggle around communicating about sex is so real, partly because we're worried that if we talk about what we want and like you go ahead and say, like, here's the recipe for green beans that just like is like, this is my favorite. Like, I love this. Every time I eat this. And your partner, there's a worry that your partner's going to be like, oh, you like that? Oh, that judgment that even when it's someone we're already having sex with, to say out loud what you like is to put yourself at risk for being rejected and judged because so much rejection and judgment exists in the world. And also, we don't want to hurt our partner's feelings. We feel fragile. There's a great definition of fragility, which is that it's perception of having inadequate resources, both external and internal, to cope with whatever's happening. And we are all trained to be fragile, to perceive that we do not have the resources, internal or external, to cope with. Like, you say a thing, you're like, here's my favorite green bean recipe. And your partner is like, what you're telling me is like, you've never liked any of the green beans I've ever made for you. And just like, shut. And you are like, you love this person. You don't want to hurt their feelings. And so how do you say, please make a different recipe without making them feel bad? And then the worst is when you go ahead and you're like, so I love you so much and I want our erotic connection to be like the best erotic connection ever, and I'd be so fascinated if we could just like try this other recipe. What do you think about that? And they're like, yeah, sure, like, great. They respond, and then they don't do it. They don't do it. And you're like, how do I say it again? And it like either it shuts down and a wall gets formed between you and your partner, or it escalates and you end up saying, So I noticed you made the green beans again, and you used the old recipe.
Yeah.
So personal story. Way a million years ago, I had a partner. This was not an amazing relationship, but his previous partner had enjoyed oral sex in one particular way, which happened to be like the opposite of the kind of oral sex that I enjoy. And every time I would direct and guide him, I'm very clear in my communication. And every time he would go back to doing it the way his previous partner had trained him to do it, because he had come to the conclusion that because this was what good oral sex was like, this is what good oral sex was like for everybody with genitals. And I eventually, and like I did all the things, I followed all the advice. And you know what finally worked is when I cried during oral sex and had to stop everything and say, you know, when you continue to do things the way you did with your other partner, it makes me feel like you want to be with her rather than with me, and that you're actually like thinking about her instead of thinking about me, and that's really alienating. And like I had to have big old feelings, and I am not in favor of like using tears and emotion to manipulate people, but in this case, like it took escalating it to that level before he could hear me.
Whew. But that compares, like that sharing of, are you there? Like, are you here with me? Right? Because you're doing this thing that you've adamantly said someone else liked. So what is actually
and that I have
happening
adamantly said
that
I don't
like.
like.
Yeah, that I don't like.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I
Most
don't know.
people would need to have a conversation like that with a therapist present, because it's a difficult one.
Yeah,
it is difficult. Because then the defense can come up, and you know, so many things can happen. So that is a really tough one.
It is.
Oh, but they're gone.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, long gone.
long gone.
So I also, you know, I feel like we're getting close to probably drawing to close, but I also really do want to get you to share the erotic floorplan, because I remember that talk and I love it. I'm like, I want to make my own little floorplan and like figure my stuff out so that I can like be more prepared with partners. But I would love to just, you know, what role does that play in all this as well?
Yes, this was the tool that made the difference for me. So the origin story of the new book is that writing a book about sex, you might think that it's like real sexy to write a book about sex.
Yeah. No.
And I was so stressed from the process of writing the book that I had zero interest in actually having any sex. So for months, nothing. And I'm this like expert writing a book, and in my own sex life, like things are not going great. So after the book came out, I did what anyone would do. I turned to the peer-reviewed research to find out how it is couples sustain a strong sexual connection over the long term. And some of the couples who struggle are couples where, and you've probably had this experience, where someone comes in and says, I'm sorry this hurts my partner's feelings, but you know what, I'd be glad if we never had sex again. And Peggy Kleinplatz tells this story of a client like this, and her response would be, okay, well, tell me about the sex you do not want. And they do not describe like ecstatic, pleasurable, joyful, authentic, vulnerable sexuality. It is, in Peggy's words, dismal and disappointing. And so Peggy will say, well, I rather like sex, but if it were me, I wouldn't want that sex either. So tell me, what kind of sex is worth wanting? And that's, which is why like pleasure is the measure. The thing I say over and over, pleasure is the measure.
Pleasure's the measure.
But that wasn't my situation. I knew that if I could just like get myself there, it would be great. We have great sex. And I just like, I can't, I'm stuck somewhere, and I can't get to that space. I can't get to like a sexy space in my mind. So I turned to Jaak Panksepp, the father of affective neuroscience, who proposes a model of emotions of the 7 primary process emotions. And I like this model because lust is one of the 7 primary process emotions. So I started thinking about it as like a room in my emotional floor plan. So where am I on my floor plan, and how do I get from wherever that is to the lust space? Because that's where I want to get to. And it turned out I was stuck in the fear space fear is one of the spaces, lust is one, and rage is the other. And you'll notice fear and rage, fight and flight, right? The stress response. So I was in like this anxious, stressed out, run state of mind. And there is no doorway from my fear space that leads into the lust space. I could not go directly from this, like, which is why I would get to the bed and cry and fall asleep.
Yeah.
What I was doing is like letting my body leave the fear space, but I was not then in the lust space.
Right.
Even if my wonderful, sexy, beautiful, gorgeous, lovely partner was there, I was somewhere else. I was in a like rest and recuperation space where I just needed my body to heal. So then after I realized, okay, so I can't navigate directly out of fear into lust. So what spaces do I have to get through? And there's 7 of the spaces, and I won't like, it takes me 2 whole chapters to describe this because it's like a really big idea. But that's essentially figuring out like what space I need to get to and what path I have to travel from where I am emotionally to where I want to be is the key for me. Knowing that the sex is good, that the kind of oral sex my partner gives is exactly the kind of oral sex I like. Like when it had been a while and we did that again and he like remembered exactly what I like. I was like, it wasn't just the pleasure of the sensations, it was the joy of being like fully seen and remembered and how our bodies could reconnect when like it had been a while.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So but I had to learn how to get there. That's the emotional floor plan.
Yes. So gotta get the book, folks.
Yes.
Okay, because this is necessary. People do feel stuck. I've had folks and clients use analogies of like, I'm in the room and I just need you to get in the room with me, and they're like, I'm in a whole different wing of the house. I can't even hear, it's like soundproof. I don't even know where you are in this house anymore. They feel so disconnected, but really having this understanding that context matters. A lot of folks kind of get stuck on the spontaneous and now the responsive, but because of Emily, we have contextual factors are also really, really important.
Yeah. So if one person is in the lust room and it's like, hey, I'm here, come and get me. No, you got to come get me. Like I'm somewhere else. I'm in the kitchen taking care of all the shit that needs to happen to make our lives happen day to day. I can't leave here until this stuff gets done. So come and help me. Yeah. And like, let's walk together to the lust space. And like the higher desire partner, one of my worries about the book is people will be like, that really sounds like so much work. It's not supposed to be so effortful. Like I shouldn't have to put in that sort of effort. What in our lives that matters to us do we not put that kind of effort into?
Bingo, exactly.
Right.
Literally.
Like if you care enough.
If you care enough,
why
you put
not?
it in your calendar, you schedule it, you let other people know that you're not available, you take the classes, you do the workshops, you get the degree, whatever the case is.
You put it in your calendar. Like you put the sports ball game you're excited about in your calendar. You cordon it off and protect it from all the other things. If you can do that, your kids play. You put it in the calendar. Not because, this is another example of like, not because you love going to your kids' music concert or their play or their dance recital, but because it matters. Yeah. And so you cordon off the space and time to make it happen.
Yes, because showing up matters.
And like
you show up.
You're protecting it, like you said, right? Like if we really care enough, we'll protect this for us. This third thing.
And super quick, the 3 characteristics, one of the things I learned from the research, 3 characteristics of couples who sustain a strong sexual connection over the long term. 1, they are friends with a strong foundation of trust and admiration in their relationship. It is shockingly controversial, this idea. The idea that really liking the person that you have sex with.
That's a whole other episode.
Yeah. But they like and admire each other. 2, they prioritize sex. It matters to them. They protect the time and space, not just to have the sexual time together, but to talk about it, to be like, what went well last time? What do we want to try differently this time? What in our past has been like interfering, or do we want to resolve? And what fantasies do we have for our future selves as erotic people? They talk about it. A lot of us were raised with the idea that if you have to talk about it, that instantaneously means that there's something wrong. No, the couples who sustain a strong sexual connection talk about sex all the time. Correlation is not causation, but talking about it is correlated with better sex.
Yes.
And a stronger sexual connection. Third thing, this is the hard one.
Okay.
The couples who sustain a strong sexual connection are the couples who actively notice all the like other people's opinions about who they're supposed to be as sexual people and make the decision that those other people are not the ones sharing this erotic connection, and so their opinions do not matter. They work on eradicating all those preconceived ideas about who they're supposed to be as sexual people and what a sexual relationship is supposed to look like, including you're not supposed to have to talk about it, and you're not supposed to have to plan it, and it's not supposed to be effortful. Yeah. It's supposed to be effortful because the things you care about, you put effort into because it matters. And in particular, unearthing that gendery mirage crap is effortful and a lifelong process. Because, man, the gender binary had decades in your brain to dig its roots in before you started pulling it out and being like, no, this is nonsense. Part of my hope for the future is that people younger and younger are recognizing that this is nonsense and like uprooting it earlier and earlier in their lives, which is so great. But though it's difficult, the reward for doing that work is when you clear out that space, that is the place where the kind of erotic connection that changes your understanding of the nature of humanity and the universe happens. That's where the kind of orgasms that change the universe into rainbows happens, is when you create space for it by eliminating everybody else's opinion of who you're supposed to be and what your sexual connection is supposed to be like.
Yes, you create so much more space for pleasure and discovery when you
Due to the sexual shame.
Yeah.
Sexual shame that we just.
What if I'm allowed to fuck my partner's armpit? What if I'm allowed to let my partner lick the arches of my feet?
Yeah.
You are.
You are.
Everyone's glad to be there.
Like, we good. We Gucci.
You can do whatever you want.
Exactly. Oh, I have like 3 questions just pop up. Because we can literally talk about this forever.
Yes.
And
I know, it's my favorite thing to talk about.
Isn't it?
So
we are
great.
the people that can say, like, oh, we talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Well, we are just so full and grateful for this conversation. And we just thank you big time, Dr. Nagoski, for joining us. Beyond the knowledge that you continuously drop here in all of your text and all of your podcasts and videos and teachings.
Yeah.
You know, there's just so much more to continue learning from you, and I'm so excited. No pressure, but for every book that you will ever write in the future.
My next book is going to be so short. I just want to write like a board book, like a book you can read on the toilet. And
that's a airplane read, right?
Airplane read?
Right, just a short, quick,
yeah,
easy, and have it just change everything for you. That's the goal.
I can tell the graphics would be great for that type of type of book. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was just so fun to have this conversation. So, is there anything you would like to add here for our listeners about how they can stay in touch with you, or any suggestions for connecting with you, finding you, reading up on you that you'd like to share?
My main website is just emilynagoski.com. Social media will have stuff. I am going on actual book tour of like traveling to physical spaces in different places across the country. So the map and dates and times and locations for all those things are on the website.
Okay. Definitely.
The book is available wherever books are sold. There is no way to buy the book that is better for the author than any other. So just buy it in the way that is most convenient for you. And also, getting it from the library is amazing. If you ask the librarians, hey, there's this book that exists and they don't have the book yet, they can order the book and make sure it's available for everybody who uses the library.
That right there, that's the trick right there. Because then we're like sharing the knowledge for ourselves and with others. And I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. I could spend also the rest of the day talking with
Right.
you, but we will let
Me
you
too.
go. And it really is just so great to see you again and talk with you again. And
My
excited
pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, listeners. Well, if you are interested in taking and applying any more of what we discussed today, take it home and add it to your personal life, you can find this week's worksheets at healingexchange.com.
Love a worksheet.
We love a worksheet. And listeners, come back next week as we delve into the Emancipation Proclamation of going no contact. You can also follow us at Soft Landing Podcast on Instagram and at healingexchange.com/podcast. Don't forget to rate us and subscribe on Spotify. And also, please send us your questions. We want to hear from you. Ask us what you want to know about relationships so we can discuss it on the pod. Okay, y'all. Have a good one. Bye.